Hello world, Frida Reba Darcy and one Patricia O'Connor here, and it is our Super Saturday, and I thought today we would do a little bit different. I'm going to take a little moment and do a little show and tell with some of my favorite trees, the Ponderosas. This is Hoss. Hoss is a 26-year-old Ponderosa pine. It was collected in Deadwood, South Dakota at an elevation of 5,800 feet. And it is, so that makes it a Yamadori. And because of its style would be characterized as literati. I have had this tree now for probably almost a year, and just long enough to see one flush of needles come out. You see these little needles that are coming out now, all pointed at the sky. On the outskirts of those, you can see some that are a little lighter in color, or some of them that are a little damaged on the tips. I think our little baby got maybe clunked around the little in shipping, but I sure am enjoying seeing all the new growth on this. And I'm just gonna this guy is typically tucked in amongst another show hen, the little oak and the little cypress and the bougainvillea, making this up close and personal stuff a little difficult. But this tree has so much character. I'm gonna do a little rotate. There is the hollow feature and the growth or the wraparound that's already been healing for several years. And you can also see that there are a couple of lichens on the trunk. They just seem to be sort of a feature of the tree to me. I don't see them getting bigger or smaller. This is a little bit of a rotate of the tree. What I've been doing is what I've been learning about as per Bonsai Mirai. What they were teaching to do is ponderosas you do a little differently than you do the two flush trees. Now these are great trees. I mean, some of the stuff that makes them really, really cool is their bark. It just looks like scales or something, and they tend to get, really twisted looking, and they'll turn on their trunks the way junipers and things do, just because of the wind, or maybe the way the sun grows in the canyons. But they always weather well and have these really twisted up trunks with this bark that's just so scaly. I'm going to zoom in on some of that in a minute when I show you Hoss's bigger sister. But right now I'm feeding this tree, and when I was checking with the original owner, I asked them, I just kind of wanted to make sure I was kind of on some sort of a program, and I didn't want to say, hey, how do you grow your trees or something. That almost sounds like it's subject to judgment, and that's not something I want to do with somebody who was already a pretty well-known collector. His game wasn't under question. Frankly, buying this tree, my game was under question. He didn't want to sell it to somebody that wouldn't really water it right or pay attention to it or let it die. I was just the opposite. I worried a lot as to whether or not I was able to do right by this tree. And so far, the tree has done real well. The only little problem that I've had with it is that pot makes it really easy to tip. So on my watch, for my end, I have had that guy tip over this way once or twice, and I've never been able to see where that's caused any damage, but it certainly does freak me out, because I'm I am naturally clumsy anyway, so Caluso moments that end up affecting my bonsai trees are almost like Horace Gad. What happened? Horace Gad. Yeah, that's what I sound like when something bad happens. A 1960s comedy. Anyway, that's just kind of zooming in on the growth there. And that's just kind of zooming in. This guy has bark all the way up the limbs, and the trunk has a lot of heavy bark on it. And it's just really, I just really think the world of this tree. Plus, this was one of my first show hens that had some time on it and had some, and was really something. It wasn't something that I had started that was too small and just hadn't grown up yet. This was already a 25-year-old tree when I got to know this guy. So the pressure was, can I grow this tree? Is my game going to be good enough to grow a tiny little tree like this without messing it up? Well, we're not quite a year in yet, but the tree seems to be happy enough. And the little bit of needle damage I see, according to the book, some of that needle on the tip damage is caused by hail, which it did show up with that. So that's very possible, seeing how it came from the Dakotas. But I'd also, in shipping, this tree came to me upside down. So I was a little stressed by that, as I feel like it probably was too, but maybe not. It was packed very, very well. The box just came upside down and it was still in place where it was, but I worried that some of these needles got damaged over that. And also, the first times I put it out on the rail, it would get subject to the heat. And there were times when I touched the pot and I felt like it was just absolutely way too hot for something that had a root mass that was that small. That would just, the percentage wise, that would be 100% of the root mass at a temperature that's really, really that high. I just thought that just seemed kind of worrisome. And also some other part of that to be concerned with would have been the wind. It's not that as a species it wouldn't handle the wind, but this I didn't want to find it tipped over because of the wind. So to that end, taking it off the rail and putting it on the table, I was like, well, this is a sun-hungry, full-on sun tree, and this isn't something that I just ordered that's a couple, and or something that's 2 years old. This is the real deal. We want to be right by it. But it's been most of the time since I had it, maybe a couple of weeks after I got it, I was like, yeah, I don't think this tree being on the rail is going to be a good idea. And that was right after then when I brought it and set it in the tray with the other show hens. Now this tree isn't likely to have roots that are going to grow out of the bottom. So that's kind of the advantage to having your tiny little pots in a tray that has some substrate in it, is they can kind of lean on that substrate on the bottom, send some roots out there, and you can get a lot of really good growth out of your show hen trees by doing that. And I wasn't going to be able to utilize that part of that with this tree, but sitting it in that tray that usually is a little bit damp would have a few benefits. One, it would take this pot out of the direct sun so that it wouldn't have its high heat situation. Two, it wouldn't be on something that reflected the light quite as badly as one, the white painted rail that was on in the beginning, or two, the fresh copper rail that I had just put in there as a drip tray. All of that stuff reflected the light and i.e. the heat directly into that pot. So by putting it on something that, as far as the other trees that were around it in the pot getting watered, meant that the substrate that this was under stayed cool and the area around here stayed cool. I don't think that it stayed, nestled down into the akadama enough that it affected the water level of this. but that turned out to be a good move. I don't think the heat for the pot and those other things that I mentioned affected it quite as much. Also, it was out of the wind, and with that much of a root base, which isn't that much, I think that's probably something that I should be concerned with. How much water is lost over the wind. So that was kind of, and this is just going to do a little quick turnaround. And as you can see, I've got the BioGold pellets there, and this guy has got that little windswept. We're looking at, it's got a that is our little gin on a limb there. But what I'm doing is whenever I ask the original grower when the last time he had fed the tree, I was told that it sounded to me like he did it sparingly. You know, it was used to it was collected in the wild and pretty much used to no nutrients in the way of feedings. So then it gets some once or twice a year or something like that. Also, I noticed that in the substrate that there were those tiny little clearish green pellets that are time release fertilizer. So there was that. And it seemed to me, without being a real Barnaby Jones or whatever, that without being nosy about his growing style and just trying to guess from 1,000 miles away, that he was probably kind of growing with the method where if you do everything sparingly, you'll reduce the growth of the tree just by keep everything going super sparingly. And you could probably get away with that fairly easy with a Ponderosa because their metabolism, if you can speak of in trees of having a metabolism, is naturally very, very slow anyway. They are, from the experts who have taught us about this, say that they just generally are very, very slow moving trees. You see things start to push out and it just kind of starts working its way out really slow. It kind of goes from one thing to the other really slow. It just basically moves all of this, you know, everything it does in just kind of a, you know, to say it again, or just kind of a slow method. So, so far I think that by feeding it, what we're going to do is encourage more growth on the ends of all of this. And right now the needle length is really good. And that is probably a reflection of all of the things that the collector did right. One thing he had going for him was he was within a few miles one way or another. He lived in the area where the tree was collected. I'm not saying he lived next door to where the tree was connected or how many miles or something, but the tree wasn't taken out of its natural environment. When it was taken out of the ground and taken back to its new home, it was in the same environment that it had been pretty much born and raised in. So accounting for its then lack of a taproot and the root ball and what have you, his job was basically to maintain a tree in a condition that it had gotten it there. And then he added some wire and did some really good styling to the tree. It was really nicely professionally done. So now the tree is no longer at 5,000 feet. I've got the ocean almost less than a rock's throw. If my left arm were in the same shape it used to be in, it would be a rock's throw to the beach. So I'm guessing that's sea level, and this is going to be like pretty close to that. So it's and also it doesn't get snow here the way it used to. In the old, its past life, by fall it was in heavy snow, and it'll probably never. So there's a lot has changed in its growing environment, and so being able to do things the old way, just keep it maintained the way it had survived for the last 26 years just fine, and then give it just a little bit more than that, and so everything should be fine. That kind of isn't going to work because we've already got a lot of things about its environment that are no longer are no longer going to be the same. So when I was looking for how do I decide what in its old life was really necessary and what in its old life was just kind of that's the breaks, that's the way it goes. So what is that I need to worry about? And one thing I do need to worry about is temperature. This guy and its sister on the deck do need to get, I believe it was 36 hours 36 hours a year of freezing temperature. For those of us who speak Fahrenheit, 36 hours of 32 degrees or below. These guys have been known to take temperatures that are just seriously cold, way much colder than what people can tolerate. Now, the part where they're in a bonsai tree does make part of their defense, takes away part of their defense mechanism. So you don't want to push that. You don't want to allow the pot to get super frozen over and all that stuff. So it might even be that you just insulate it in snow for all I know, but I would think leaves or something like that if you live in the winter. And other than that, it's probably not going to get cold enough. If you can live there, it probably can too when it comes to cold. But also in the summer, it's going to see some ungodly amount of heat because of the elevations that it is could be at. And then also, it's going to be in the wind. This guy is usually grows on south-facing outcroppings. So, and one thing that I would also learn is you just look at the environment that they're known for, and don't necessarily look at that as, oh, that's what it likes. It doesn't necessarily like not ever getting water. It doesn't necessarily like not ever getting fed. It doesn't necessarily like growing on a shallow rock, trying to run a taproot over the top of the rock for 3 miles in order to get something that can keep it sustained. That is just the environment for where it could live without other things that could live there out competing them. So if treated in another way, it will perform in another way. If you start giving this guy a little bit more water, because now it doesn't have a taproot to rely on that would be necessary, and still it's going to get less water than my black pines. But if you start giving this guy a little less water, but give it water regularly, it's going to like that. And if you start giving it a little bit of feeding, it's going to like that. And the end result is it will start to grow maybe longer needles, more needles. It'll start back budding more. The tree will get healthy and vigorous. And as it does, maybe we'll start to see those needles all get longer. But as it creates more resources, there'll come a point to where that then healthier, slightly bushier Ponderosa will no longer be able to keep a long needle length because of the amount of energy it has stored up in its bonsai pot root base. So right now, if by feeding it, I'm allowing the needles that it has to grow longer, that will cause it to grow more needles. And as those needles get replaced with new rounds of needles, all of those needles are going to want to grow longer again, but they're going to find that they don't have as much energy between them due to the limited amount of resources being divided by an ever increasing amount of needles. So you get a fuller, healthier tree that has to start restricting its own needle growth to even out what's going on with the root mass. And if at this point you've got some elongated candles and all that stuff, then you can go in with your scissors and cut those back as needed. But until that time, we haven't done any needle reduction. We might reduce old needles, old thinning dying needles. We might clean up the bottom a little, but nothing like a needle reduction to balance the energy. We're not going to do that with the Ponderosa. What we're also not going to do is candle pruning. Wait, didn't you just say? Yeah, but that might be 3 years from now. We might go through and cut back some of the candles. And in the meantime, some of the newer later growth. But in the meantime, we want that thing to flush out more needles and more back buds and more resources. And we're not going to try to maintain this bonsai by keeping it, kind of in the same boat it used to be in, except now with a slightly more predictable amount of water. No, we're going to try to raise the health and the vigor of the tree throughout in a sustainable way, and then we will prune it back as our resources become too abundant, and that will be sustainable at that point. And that's kind of how I am going to do this here. Now, what I was also saying about the 36 hours, the 36 hours of cold, that is, there's ways around that. 36 hours of cold. I don't think we've gotten freezing temperatures in Alameda this year. I don't think so. I think I've gotten some high 40s. And that's not to say that I was paying attention 24/7 to exactly what the temperature here was all the time. It might have been that one night it dipped down lower than what they were saying and I didn't notice. I'm sure that's very possible. Sometimes I'll wake up and it's been flooding and I didn't even know that was going to happen. But that aside, I have had some of the other locals and around that I've talked to say that they thought that we had, so maybe in the outlying areas they've had some freezing temps, but I don't think I've reached that yet. And I can probably get away with that for a year or two, but there will be a point when the tree will have gone so long without its little bit of a reset that will begin to zap it of its resources, and you will see the tree start to lose limbs. Now, the way around that is, like, say we didn't get our freeze this year, and last year it was in Deadwood, South Dakota, and it was under snow by September, end of August possibly. So that's just the way it rolls there. So since then it hadn't seen a temperature that cold yet and didn't even get a freeze this year. Okay, so we can probably go a year or two. So next year we need to make sure that we get our 2 nights of 32 degrees Fahrenheit. Now, this is a show hen. I could actually get away with somebody. So I asked the question out loud: could I put the tree in the ice box? I mean, I'm not going to be able to do that with a 4 foot tall literati tree, but a show hen. This would actually fit in the top of the freezer if I want to put a thermometer in there and just see what my temperatures actually are. So somebody went, yeah, if you put a grow light in there, you absolutely could. Well, it wouldn't have to be the most fantastic grow light in the world, because it's got to basically, it would basically be replicating winter light, which is, not all of that, not all that you would hope for in the way of light naturally as the tree would know it. So I'm wondering if that would do. Also, let's say I had a day where it's in the 40s all day and then the sun goes down. It's not going to need a grow light then. Could it then spend the night in the icebox or something where the temperatures drop down that low and I could start banking that time? These are all questions I have. But the other ways of getting around this, and here's 2. One, take your trees and go up into the mountains and see that friend of yours, and let the trees hang out there for a week or 2 and get snowed on at least once every 2 years. You do that, you'll probably keep your trees healthy. There's actually a chemical that's produced or not produced when they don't get that time to stop, but it just wrecks their health, and they will start getting weak, and it's likely something else that'll kill them. But that's how that starts. That's one way. The other way is I could decide that I don't like all these Ponderosa needles, which I do. I love them. I think they're fantastic just the way they are. They're not really the hard green the way you see the Japanese black pines, and they're not the little pretty white bluish green, the way you see the white pines. These guys are more of a lime green, and they almost look kind of pastel-y, like they're kind of dusty or something. They don't transpire water the same way. They don't look quite as waxy, but they are, in their own way, they are very rugged and very beautiful. But I digress. The point here is the root system of a ponderosa and the rest of the structure would lend itself to grafts very well. So, like for instance, this tree, the growth on those almost looks like scions, just in the way that they're small and dainty and all of that. Those could be, I mean, they're not, but those could just as easily, I could, you know, if my game were such, I could make a lot of that growth on there behind all of those little clusters of needles. I could put a little Japanese black pine, or yeah, let's just say a Japanese black pine, little scion or graft behind those, and the success rate of that would be as good as my ability to do that. So somebody who's got a 75 or 80% ratio or better would expect that kind of an outcome. And then once those grafts take hold, you would no longer grow this tree like a ponderosa. You would grow it like whatever grafts it took. And in our example, we were saying a Japanese black pine. So then all of a sudden, we don't have to worry about the 36 hours or 36 hours of 32 degrees. We don't have to, and we will have to worry about fitting needles, and we will have to worry about cutting candles. But the root structure and all of that is absolutely killer, like almost tailor-made for the needs that Japanese black pine needles, their requirements. They are different in structure in a lot of ways, but they do lend themselves very well to one another. I don't see myself doing those. Never say never. I like the way my ponderosas look. I think it would be cool to have some trees that are grafted with this or that, but I also like being able to look at these and go, yeah, these are collected trees, not grafted. And so that is a little look at Hoth, my 26-year-old Ponderosa pine, Scopulorum, Ponderosa Pinus Scopulorum. I think there are like 4 or 5, maybe 6 different varieties of our subspecies, if I'm using the right terminology, of Ponderosa. And the Scopulorum is, according to those who know, that I've been told, that is the guy that you want to use. And you can identify them most by the region that they grow in, Rockies and all that stuff. Anyway, from here, we're going to, by the way, I think that new lighting, me taking the lighting and putting over that, kind of works really well. Let me know what you think. So from here, let's go take a look at Hondo. Hondo, the Pondo, is 175 years old. Comes from the same neighborhood as its little sister, back on the table, Deadwood, South Dakota. This is a little look. Is that going to focus? This is a little look at the grain in the bark. And I'm just going to do a little pan down and show you how this stuff looks and how this stuff does. It's so twisted. And the tree, you can kind of tell the way the bark just kind of runs this way and that way and this way. And like I was saying earlier, those needles are kind of pale, but we've got a lot of new shoots coming through on this guy too. I turned it around, I rotated it so I could see our tree on the sunny side. And we had all of those little pollen pods now everywhere. And they were also robbing a lot of light. The tree looked a little pale where they were. Kind of knocked them off, most of them loose. But this is a look back on it. It's so pretty. And again, come on, focus. Come on, guy. Give me some focus here. Do the thing. Boo. So you can see that bark is just so crackly and it's twisted. It's got these spirals going in it. So that texture is so cool. Focus. So I don't think that I'm always able to give, and you can just see these little, this tree just twisted as it grew and raised. And you can see how it just kind of wraps around itself and how it wrapped around itself. I can just see that happening. It's hanging off of a rock somewhere, and as the wind blows, the tree just kind of starts rocking. And as it does, it's just doing that. And then limbs are growing out on this side, and as they come out, they get caught on the wind, and it's just starting to pull it over. And those limbs growing out on one end and growing out on the other, and the snow pulling on them, and the wind pushing on them, and the trees probably getting full sun on one side longer on the day than it is on the other, which is kind of going to make it want to do things. And you can just see it. You can just see it spiral right on around. I've heard the experts say they don't know why the trees spiral around, but I can just imagine. Anyway, that smells so sweet when you find those little cracks in the bark. These are my ponderosas. This one is Hondo. Hondo the Pondo. Normally, I think crooked needles like that is not the best sign. It's not that we're in trouble now. All of those little pollen pods you can see all over the ground, they had those guys growing out funny. Maybe in the wild they would have blown off by now. And here they didn't. I just kind of had to knock them off. So, if you touched them, they just fell off. So it wasn't like I was pulling on them or anything. But yeah, I've already done most of our spill. Showing off Hoss, which I don't mind. That's a knockout little tree on its own. But so is this guy. Look at all of that. So like I was saying earlier, you can see these can just grow longer out and get fuller and just back bud more and more. And when it makes all those needles, they'll start naturally just going back shorter. And then at that point, if we've got a candle that came all the way out to here and made leaves, we can snip those back and snip them back to a desirable length again and let it start all over. But at the same time, we will have fed the tree spring through fall, and we will not have done any evening or thinning of the needles to try to match the strength anywhere. We will not be doing any of that, and we won't be cutting any candles back the way we will be here in just a minute on our Japanese black pines. See this bend here? When somebody was talking to me recently, they said they had seen, or somebody wrote in the comments that they had seen some ponderosas from collectors that were very close to the collector that I got my tree from, and they looked very similar to mine, and I had seen that too. and it kind of gave me the conclusion, like this was probably a cut. This was probably a wedge cut. Some of my regular viewers know that I talk about those before. I can kind of almost see it right. They would have made a cut and then pulled that end down. So let's say this came this way, and then this piece were up there another 2.5 feet. That's probably would have been a lot less flattering, but that's probably what somebody saw when they first saw this tree. So after they harvested and collected it, they did that wedge cut, and that probably wasn't their first rodeo, or maybe they learned that trick from their guy up the road or down the road. I think whenever you go to a different region and you see how people treat the local material, quite often I think that you will see people exchange ideas back and forth from one another, and you can see that people with various degrees of success practicing some of the same concepts. I'm very happy with the way my tree looks. But yes, I have seen others that were same, 3, 4, 5 foot versions of the long Ponderosa that was hanging out of a rock somewhere. And quite often they'll have somewhere that would have been strategically pleasing. I think when the ad for this tree came out, I believe I remember some mention of this being higher than this. And that looked to me like it was worded in such a way as to be a rule. I didn't know. It's like sometimes you hear somebody state something and you know that they're telling people who know to ask questions that are a little over your head. They're giving the answer to those, and you don't really know what question they're answering, but you know that's something. Anyway, that chop was a matter of measurement, is what I took from that. He goes, the apex of the trunk is so many inches, which is higher than the apex of that might be a literati rule. I don't know exactly. I thought that was possibly a literati statement, like in the rules of literati, but also it told me that he knew exactly how high that chop was. And one reason why you one reason you might know is maybe you have a tape measure and you just measure from the top of but also it might be because you have a tape measure and you measured from there up. You knew where you needed to make your cut for your tree to fit into a certain category, and you were strategic about it. That is what the conclusions that I leapt to. I'm just showing you this tree from all of the angles that we normally do not get to see it. Will you please, autofocus my behind? No, do not autofocus my behind. Anyway, this is, no 7-year-old humor. This is the Ponderosa named Hondo the Pondo. 175 years old, collected from Deadwood, South Dakota at 5,800 feet by Randy Smith at Golden Arrow Bonsai. I believe I nailed it on that. I believe I nailed it on that. Just nod yes, Pat. Go with it. So that is us. This is just a little look at our Ponderosas. You can kind of see how the other stuff we've been working on the last couple of days is looking. I am enjoying seeing more of Hondo today. Normally she's pointed out that way, overlooking the pool, and whenever I go down and walk Frida, I can look at it, and it's the one bonsai tree that sort of hangs off. But this is a rare look at her facing us. And man, Ponderosas are so cool. Their like regional name back in the day was the big pine, because they grow really, really tall. They also have a hard time dating these trees, because somewhere over 800 years they rot out from the inside and get hollow features, so they live, you know, presumably hundreds of years past that, but without the inner core of rings to make them countable. Whenever I was told this was 175 years old on one hand, that doesn't make a hill of beans to me. I bought the tree because it's beautiful, but I think somebody could probably get in there and do some counting of those rings. I also think if you did a wedge cut, you would have a wedge like that for which you would be able to count rings. So that's probably where the estimate of age came from. We also have this feature down here and this bark down here. Oh my goodness. What a beaut. So thank you so much for sticking around. We're probably on about our 198th video or so. We're getting pretty close. Like and subscribe if you haven't already. I appreciate you. Frida appreciates you. And our next drop, I'll probably do one of these again tomorrow. I'm not going to be doing a whole lot tomorrow. It's Sunday, hanging out at the house. I might watch the Grand Prix and then do a bonsai video. I don't know, but that would be kind of like us to do a Saturday and Sunday drop. But these are our Ponderosas. I'll probably have a few more Ponderosas here before too long. Thank you so much for watching.